Hey, I'm Blondeguygamer, and this is Plug and Play. The Game Boy Advance. I really don't need to say much about it other than it's a Nintendo handheld that has sold over 80 million units and has a lot of great games for it. Being able to play those games anywhere is nice, but there may be times you don't feel like hunching over a small screen or, in the case of video makers like me, want to legitimately record Game Boy Advance games without camcording them or using an emulator. Fear not, for Nintendo gave us an add-on for the Gamecube in 2003 that allows you to play all your Game Boy Advance and even older Game Boy and Game Boy Color games on your TV. The Game Boy Player. Now, this isn't the first time we've been able to play Game Boy games on the big screen. The Super Game Boy for the Super Nintendo already did that with the original Game Boy. But this time around, the Game Boy Player is a leap into the next generation, as it turns your GameCube into a fully functional Game Boy Advance. Although it's not as simple as just putting the game in the device and putting said device in the system like the Super Game Boy, but it's still not all that complicated. In order to attach the device on the GameCube, open the high-speed port from the bottom and put it in place, securing the player with these two screws using either a screwdriver or a coin, which the instructions actually do suggest either of those. I like to use a loonie for a little Canadian patriotism. It's what we call our dollar coins because there's a loon on them. And we also have $2 coins we call toonies, even though those don't have a loon on them, it's a polar bear, but we call them toonies because it rhymes with loony. Shut up! Anyway, once we've done that, we put the startup disc in the tray, which is required to run the player, so don't lose it. Then all you have to do is put in whatever game you wish to play into the slot, turn on the GameCube, and you're good to go. In terms of controls, playing the games with a GameCube controller is passable, although its analog stick or even the D-pad isn't quite as authentic as a Game Boy Advance, but luckily you can use one. As long as you have a GBA to GameCube cable, you can hook up a Game Boy Advance or a Game Boy Advance SP into a controller port. Turn that on while the player is running, and after seeing the Game Boy Player logo pop up, you now have that as a controller. I usually prefer using an SP myself so I don't have to worry about AA batteries, and I like its D-pad better than the originals. There are GameCube controllers designed for the Game Boy Player in mind, but we're limited outside of Japan, so you'll most likely need to import if you want one of those. But I'm pretty content with using a Game Boy Advance SP, although you may want to keep a GameCube controller on hand since you can only access the options with one. But don't worry, you can have both plugged in any of the controller sockets at the same time and use either just fine. Pressing the Z button opens the options menu, though most things are fairly limited. You can change the frame, similar to the borders on the Super Game Boy, but you only have about 20 to choose from, and some are either just stock or kind of bleh. You also have choosing between normal or full display sizes for the game window, changing between two control settings for the GameCube controller, which swap the X and Y and L and R buttons for selecting the shoulder buttons, and being able to use the C-stick for directional input. But the default first setting is perfectly fine unless for some reason you want the latter option, selecting a video filter between sharp, normal, and soft, with sharp being a little crisper while soft reduces any flickering games might have, but makes things more blurry. I usually leave it on normal or sharp. And a timer that can go up to 60 minutes. I really don't see much use for this unless you don't have a watch or phone handy to know when your frozen pizza is done. Finally, you have the Change Game Pack, which is very handy to switch games without having to turn off and on the GameCube constantly. Once you select that, all you do is eject the cartridge and putting in a new game starts it immediately. These options overall do, however, leave a little to be desired, as they're all basic with the only closest thing to a feature being a stopwatch. Fortunately, the Game Boy Player delivers on what it promises, and that is playing Game Boy Advance games. I have no complaints whatsoever for the video and audio quality and enjoy playing these on the player. And with faster paced games like F-Zero or resource intensive ones like Gunstar Superheroes, there is absolutely no slowdown and they perform flawlessly. I've used the Game Boy Player since it came out to play, and in more recent years, record Game Boy Advance games for videos and still do to this day as it holds up quite well even after over 10 years. All my GBA games work with it, but there are a few exceptions where it may not work as intended, such as with games like WarioWare Twisted that use motion sensors. It is possible to play them, but as I demonstrated in a filler video for my channel here, moving the GameCube around that much is most likely not a good idea for the system over long periods of time, not to mention being really awkward to handle. Then there's this game, Boktai, The Sun Is in Your Hands, a very unique Game Boy Advance game from Hideo Kojima that uses a UV sensor on the cartridge for actual sunlight that plays into the game. Unfortunately, other light sources won't work, so unless your GameCube is directly under sunlight or you somehow get the sun to shine on the sensor through other means, it's not really going to work. I should also mention that Game Boy Advance video cartridges won't work at all in the player because of copyright protection, though I'm not sure why you would want to watch these highly compressed cartoons on a TV anyway. Luckily, a lot of other things do work since the player uses the same external extension connector above the game slot, which means you can use the link cable to play multiplayer games with other Game Boy Advances, use the e-reader, which is how I was able to review it years ago, or even a GBA to GameCube cable. Actually, hang on, what would happen if I plugged that in the GameCube controller port while it's running? Okay, nothing really happens, but you could use the player as a controller for games like The Legend of Zelda 4 Sword Adventures or Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles, provided you have extra displays and such, but even getting 4 link cables and GBAs for those can be a hassle. Although I did see a Let's Play of 4 Sword Adventures where they did plug in 4 Game Boy players into a Wii and captured all 5 sources at once, so it is possible. While I did mention earlier that the features for the player beyond playing the games were, well, lacking, there are a few games that do utilize it, mostly with the rumble option when using a Gamecube controller, though not a wave burst since those don't have it. Super Mario Advance 4, the GBA version of Super Mario Bros. 3, has rumble when you get hit or die, but that's pretty much it. Another is Mario & Luigi Superstar Saga, though it only rumbles during certain parts of cutscenes, but not in battles or something like that where you think it would. Last but not least for rumble supported games I have is Drill Dozer, one of the few non-Pokemon games made by Game Freak, which already has a built-in rumble pack in its cartridge, but uses the Gamecube controller's rumble when in the player. This is the best use of the rumble feature, and I highly recommend this game as well. Mario vs. Donkey Kong doesn't have rumble, but has a GBA player setting in the video options that supposedly makes the game's color or something more suitable when playing on that. But between that and the original GBA setting, I didn't really notice much of a difference on either my TV or captured footage. So yeah, only those games, along with Pokemon Pinball Ruby and Sapphire and a few GBA Japanese games, have something to offer when being played on the Game Boy player. But it wouldn't be a Nintendo accessory if only a few games utilized it. It's not right next to N64 transfer pack. One thing we can't forget is that the player is fully compatible with older Game Boy and Game Boy Color games and play exactly like they would on normal Game Boy Advance, since it is the same hardware and all. Color compatible Game Boy games, or black cartridges, play in color, and clear cartridge Game Boy only ones work just as well too. Much like the Advance games, this is how I'm able to record Game Boy Color games too. Games like the GBC version of Perfect Dark that had a battery operated rumble, which already fits awkwardly into the player slot, will still work, but you might as well not have the rumble on since it's only from the pack unless you want the cartridge to make noise while playing. Original Game Boy games play fine, but you're limited to the 4 color palettes you get when you play them on a Color or Advance. Because of this, you don't get any of the unique frames, color palettes, or features Super Game Boy compatible games had with that. In fact, I wish the player had unique frames for Game Boy Advance games in that regard, but we just have to pick from the limited set of frames. Tangent aside, when booting up an original Game Boy game, you can press various D-pad and button inputs to change the color palette, which the Game Boy Player manual thankfully provides a list of. I usually just select the black and white gray option while playing Game Boy games on this, but sometimes a little color could spice things up. Let's see, if we want to give the first Mega Man Game Boy game a little color, let's just make Mega Man blue. Should be simple enough. We'll just input the blue palette and... okay, the background is blue, but Mega Man is pink. Let's try dark blue and... still pink. Okay, let's just try all the other palettes until he's blue. Brown? No. Red? Okay, he's green, but no. Dark brown? No. Pastel mix? Yeah, no. Orange? No. Yellow? There we go! The background is now eye-bleeding yellow, but at least Mega Man is now blue finally. That's about everything for the Game Boy player. It retailed for around $50 by itself, and it came in limited bundles with the Gamecube. Getting one second hand these days costs just about as much as it did originally, however. But if you have a Gamecube and can get a good deal on both the player and disc, then I highly recommend it. There does exist other means to play Game Boy Advance games on systems, such as one that connects to a Game Boy memory card port, or even an adapter for the Super Nintendo lets you play GBA games on that, but your best quality bet is the Game Boy Player from Nintendo themselves. It may not have as much features or customization as the Super Game Boy, but it's one add-on for the Gamecube that's worth getting. It's actually one of the main reasons I keep my Gamecube even after getting a Wii, before those stopped being backwards compatible anyway. With that, this has been Blondeguygamer for this episode of Plug and Play. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm off to create an elaborate system of mirrors like a Legend of Zelda puzzle in order to try and get boktai working on the player. I know it would be easier to just get the sunlight using a handheld, but I like a challenge.